In October of 1940, in India, a 19-year-old English girl named Diana married an army captain named John Jarman, and by every account, these two were completely devoted to each other. But the timing could not have been worse because this was 1940 and the war decided everything. They got what Diana's family would later call the briefest of honeymoons. And then John's regiment shipped out to Malaya and Diana stayed behind in India. And they started doing what millions of couples were doing at the time, waiting for the war to be over so their life could start. Then, in February of 1942, Singapore fell to the Japanese, and John Jarman was killed defending it. But the fall of Singapore was one of the most chaotic defeats in British history, and in that chaos, the army's paperwork simply collapsed. The telegram that should have reached Diana never went out. So as far as she knew, John was a prisoner of war somewhere, and one day he'd come home. And after months of hearing nothing, she couldn't stand the waiting anymore. And she wrote to John's mother in England. We still have her words. I am coming home. I've had no news of John yet. I shall be with you at Christmas. Christmas. She had a date in her head now. And so in October of 1942, with her husband already 8 months in a grave she knew nothing about, 21-year-old Diana Jarman boarded a steamship in Bombay called the City of Cairo, and she sailed for home. Now, the City of Cairo was not a warship. She was a passenger liner. About 300 people on board, crew and families, women and children, and she was sailing essentially alone. From South Africa, Diana sent her family one short cable. Arrived Durban. Will cable again later. There would be no later. That cable was the last thing her family ever heard from her. Because on the evening of November 6th, 1942, the city of Cairo was out in the middle of the South Atlantic. The nearest land was a tiny island called St. Helena, about 500 miles away, when a German U-boat put a torpedo into her side. The order goes out to abandon ship, and this part, at least, goes the way it's supposed to. It's calm. People file to their stations. Diana climbs into one of the lifeboats, and the crews start lowering the boats down toward the water. And that is when the second torpedo hits. And the blast from that second torpedo tears Diana's lifeboat apart while it's hanging in the air and throws her into the sea. She doesn't drown. In the dark, in the swell, in her clothes, Diana swims until she finds another lifeboat, and hands reach down and haul her out of the water. And from that boat, soaked and freezing, she would have watched the city of Cairo go down. One of the men beside her, a Scottish quartermaster named Angus MacDonald, whose account is the reason we know almost everything that happened next, remembered somebody saying quietly, "There she goes," and the ship slid down, bow up, and the sea closed over her, and nobody made a sound. And then a shape rose up out of the water right beside the lifeboats. It was the U-boat, the same one that had just sunk them. And its captain called across the dark in English, asking the ship's name and what she'd been carrying. The survivors answered him. There was a pause, and then the German captain said this, "Good night, sorry for sinking you." And the U-boat slid away and was gone. And that was it. 6 little boats, black water in every direction, and one island somewhere over the horizon. Now let me tell you about the boat Diana ended up in, because the numbers matter. It was carrying 54 people, more than it was ever designed to hold. It leaked, badly enough that it had to be bailed by hand, around the clock, for as long as it stayed afloat. And with 54 mouths aboard rations meant for fewer, the food and water were never going to be enough. And here's where Diana Jarman becomes the story. Because she was 21 years old, one of the youngest people in that boat, by the logic of 1942, one of the people who was supposed to be looked after. And instead, she took the boat's first aid kit and she went to work. She dressed wounds. She nursed the sick and the burned. When people called her Mrs. Jarman, she stopped them. "Call me Diana." When the men at the oars gave out, she took her turn at the tiller. MacDonald would say years later that she could never do enough for the others, and that she put to shame men in that boat who'd given up from the very first day. The 6 boats had set out together for St. Helena. But Diana's boat was the fastest under sail, and so a decision was made. she'd push on ahead, reach the island first, and send back help. And by the next morning, the other 5 boats were gone below the horizon, and Diana's boat was completely alone. By the 10th day, they should have sighted the island. They hadn't. And that's when the dying started. The officer in charge of the boat lost his mind before he lost his life. And when he went, he took the navigation with him. Because after that, nobody left on board really knew where they were. One man began secretly pulling the drain plug from the bottom of the boat when no one was watching. He decided that if he was going to die out there, everyone would go with him. They caught him at it more than once. And through all of it, the bailing, the burials, the thirst, Diana kept working. 54 people had been pulled into that lifeboat. By the end of the 3rd week, there were 8 of them left alive. Then 5, then 3, 2 merchant seamen, MacDonald was one of them, and Diana. 36 days after the torpedo, on December 12th, a ship appeared on the horizon. And here's where this story does something that almost never happens in the middle of an ocean. The ship that found them was German, a blockade runner hauling cargo home to occupied France. The enemy, again. The people who lifted Diana out of that boat were on the same side of the war as the men who had put her in it. And they were kind to her. She was fed, warmed, cared for. But 36 days had done damage that kindness couldn't reach. Her throat was so far gone she could no longer swallow. And so the ship's doctor kept her alive with a needle. And finally he came to the 2 seamen, because there was no one else left in the world to ask, and said he needed to operate, and he needed their consent. MacDonald didn't trust him, but he wanted Diana well again more than he'd wanted anything in that whole ordeal. So he said yes. They let the men see her first. Her hair had been washed and set. She was thin, and she could only whisper, but MacDonald said she seemed happy, and she told them she was being well looked after. They didn't mention the operation. They said their goodbyes and went back to their cabin. At 7 o'clock that evening, the German captain came to their door, and MacDonald knew before the man opened his mouth. "I have bad news for you," the captain said. "The English girl has died. Will you follow me, please?" The operation had gone well, the doctor told them in broken English. Her heart just wasn't strong enough for the anesthetic. She had survived 2 torpedoes and 36 days in an open boat. And she died in a clean bed, being cared for, 8 days short of the Christmas she'd promised her mother-in-law. She was 21 years old. The next morning, the German crew assembled on deck in full uniform, and they buried Diana Jarman at sea under a Union Jack, her own flag, flown by her enemies, because they had nothing else of hers to honor. The captain said a prayer. MacDonald remembered tears in the eyes of the German sailors. Then the ship stopped her engines, and the coffin went down into the sea, and the enemy stood bareheaded at attention until it was gone. Now, you would think the sea was finished with these 2 survivors. It wasn't. Weeks later, the German ship that had saved them was herself sunk by a British cruiser. MacDonald went into the water for the 2nd time in 2 months, was pulled out by a German U-boat, and spent the rest of the war a prisoner. The other seamen drifted in yet another lifeboat to Spain. And it was from Spain that the story of the girl in the lifeboat finally made it home. Diana's family heard it first, not from the army, and not from the shipping line, but in a BBC news broadcast. And England gave out medals for it. Both surviving seamen were decorated for what they'd endured, and they had earned every bit of it. But Diana Jarman was given nothing. The rule, the authorities said, was that the medal couldn't go to someone already dead, except for another man from the city of Cairo who had died. They'd quietly backdated the award to the day before his death. It could be done. It just wasn't done for her. And in the official account of the ordeal, nearly 1,000 words long, her name does not appear. Not once. The enemy who killed her gave her a flag, a prayer, and their tears. Her own country gave her 1,000 words and left her out of every one of them. She never made it home for Christmas, but one tribute keeps her story alive, written up by the family of a man who sailed on her ship. And it opens with a single line. "One crowded hour of glorious life is worth an age without a name.